Crash in the forest. The forest was quiet that night. The moon hung low over the tall trees, casting a silver glow on the leaves. Owls hooted in the distance, and the cool wind made the branches sway. Everything seemed normal, until the sky suddenly tore open. A loud boom echoed across the mountains. Birds flew away in panic. Something bright, something on fire, shot through the sky like a falling star. It crashed deep into the woods, shaking the earth. Trees snapped. Smoke rose high. Mark Winters, a forest ranger, was on patrol that night. He had been walking a trail near the crash zone when he saw the light fall from the sky. His boots pounded the dirt as he ran toward the noise, flashlight in hand, gun on his belt just in case. He had seen meteor crashes before, but something felt different about this one. As he reached the area, he smelled burning metal. The trees were still smoking. His light caught something strange. It was a small silver pod, shaped like a tear. It had strange symbols glowing on the side. A few sparks popped from its cracked body. Then, he heard a sound, a soft cry. Mark moved closer, slowly, carefully. He crouched near the pod and wiped the dirt off a round window. Inside, curled up in a ball, was a tiny alien girl. She looked no taller than a 6-year-old child. Her skin was pale blue with glowing spots across her cheeks. Her eyes were too big for her face, and they were wide with fear. The pod hissed as it opened. The girl scrambled back, pressing herself against the inner wall of the pod. She was shaking. Her breathing was fast and shallow. She looked at Mark, like he was a monster. Her eyes locked on his hands, on his sides, on his face. Mark held his hands up. "It's okay. I won't hurt you," he said in a soft voice. But she didn't understand. All she knew was what her people told her. Humans are dangerous. They eat the weak. If you crash on Earth, hide. She let out a sharp cry and tried to crawl away, but the pod was too small. She winced. Her leg was injured. Blood, blue and glowing, dripped down her calf. She looked up again at Mark. He could see her pain. Slowly, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small water bottle. He placed it on the ground near the pod, then backed away. The girl stared at it. Her lips were dry. Her small body trembled from cold and fear. After a moment, she crawled forward, snatched the bottle, and drank like she hadn't had water in days. Mark watched silently. "You're just a kid," he whispered. After a minute, he took off his jacket and held it out to her. She froze. Was this a trap? Was he going to grab her? But Mark didn't move. He just left the jacket near the pod, then sat on a fallen tree a few feet away. He didn't say anything else. He just waited. The girl, still frightened, reached out slowly and pulled the jacket inside. It was soft and warm. Her eyes softened, just a little. She wrapped herself in it. She didn't trust him, but he hadn't hurt her yet. Mark looked up at the stars. "You're far from home, aren't you?" He didn't expect an answer, and none came. He sat with her like that for almost an hour, keeping watch as she slowly calmed down. The fire from the pod burned out. The forest grew quiet again. Then she spoke, in a soft alien voice, barely a whisper. Mark didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear, tired, scared, but grateful. Mark smiled gently. "You're safe now." The girl didn't know the meaning of his words, but she saw his face, his calm eyes, and something deep inside her started to change. Maybe, just maybe, not all humans were monsters, but high above them, hidden in the clouds, a blinking red light showed that someone, or something, was watching. The crash hadn't gone unnoticed, and someone was coming. The blanket and the fire. The tiny alien girl didn't sleep that night. Even though she was wrapped in a soft human jacket and sitting near a warm fire, her wide, glowing eyes stayed, fixed on the man. Mark had brought her to his small wooden cabin, deep in the forest where no one else lived. The place smelled of old books, pine wood and something cooking on the stove. But to her it was the smell of danger. Ziri, though Mark didn't know her name yet, sat in the corner like a frightened animal. She gripped the edge of the jacket tight, her sharp little fingers hidden inside the sleeves. Her legs were tucked under her, and her injured foot throbbed. But she didn't cry. She just stared. Mark didn't force her to speak. He placed a small cup of warm broth on the floor near her, and then stepped away, giving her space. He sat across the room, pulled out a first aid kit, and began patching up his own hand. She had bitten him earlier. Her teeth had been sharper than he expected. As he wrapped the bandage, he looked at her and smiled gently. "I guess I deserved that." She didn't understand the words, but the tone, the softness. It didn't sound like a predator. It sounded kind. An hour passed. Ziri slowly dragged the cup closer. She sniffed the warm liquid. It didn't smell poisonous. Carefully, she took a small sip, and her eyes widened. It was good. Strange, but good. Mark noticed but didn't move. He let her eat at her own pace. Every time he made eye contact, he quickly looked away, trying not to scare her. Then, the fire crackled louder, and Ziri flinched. Mark stood and walked over to the fireplace. She tensed, expecting something bad, but all he did was add more wood and adjust the flames. The room grew warmer. The soft orange light lit up her pale blue skin, making her markings glow faintly. "You must be freezing," Mark said, more to himself than to her. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small wool blanket. He walked slowly toward her, stopping a few feet away, and crouched down. Ziri backed into the corner, ready to scream, but Mark didn't grab her. He just placed the blanket gently on the floor and whispered, "Here, in case you need it." Then he stood up and walked away, heading to the other side of the cabin. Ziri looked at the blanket. It looked warm. It smelled like comfort. Slowly, she reached out and pulled it toward her. She wrapped it around her small body and let out a soft breath, like she had been holding it in for hours. She watched the human from behind the blanket. He wasn't staring. He wasn't trying to touch her. He just sat on his chair, reading a book, sipping tea, and sometimes glancing out the window like he was keeping watch. That confused her. Why wasn't he locking her up? Why wasn't he calling others? Why was he helping her? Where she came from? Kindness was rare, especially toward the weak. On her planet, she was small, unfit for battle, and often overlooked. But this human had carried her, fed her, and now sat quietly in the same room, doing nothing more than letting her feel safe. For the first time in her short life, Ziri felt a strange thing. Not fear, not confusion. She felt safe. A soft yawn escaped her mouth. She hadn't realized how tired she was. Her head leaned against the wall, and her eyes slowly began to close. Mark noticed. He got up slowly, walked to the fireplace, and dimmed the flames just a bit. As he passed her, she didn't flinch this time. She just peeked from under the blanket and watched him move gently, carefully, like someone who had seen hurt creatures before. Then, in a small voice, she whispered something. It was her language, unknown to him, but he heard it. "Tharvan." He turned and looked at her. "Is that your name?" She looked confused. He smiled softly. "I'll call you Tharvan then, until you tell me otherwise." She tilted her head. Then slowly she shook it. She placed a small hand over her chest and whispered, "Ziri." Mark pointed to himself. "Mark." Ziri blinked. Then something unexpected happened. She nodded. Names were shared. Fear was not gone, but something new had begun. And far above, in the clouds beyond Earth's eyes, the signal from her crashed pod had reached someone who was not happy. The clock had started. Signals in the sky far beyond Earth's blue sky, deep in the blackness of space, something had started moving. On a hidden alien command ship orbiting the edge of the solar system, red lights began flashing. Screens lit up with strange symbols. A single distress signal had been received, from a pod that had crashed on Earth. The pod belonged to Ziri, one of their youngest scoutlings. She was never supposed to be on the planet alone, and now, she was missing. Commander Talvek stood with arms behind his back, his face sharp like stone. He stared at the screen. "Prepare the strike team," he said coldly. "If the humans have taken her, we burn that forest." Back on Earth, Ziri didn't know someone was coming. She had spent the night inside Mark's wooden cabin. For the first time, she woke up without fear twisting her chest. The fire was still warm, she smelled food. Her body still ached, but her heart didn't race like before. Mark sat at the table cooking eggs. He smiled when she stirred. "Morning, Ziri?" She blinked, then sat up slowly. Her leg was bandaged, wrapped with care. She looked at him confused. Why was he still helping? He walked over and placed a small plate in front of her. "Try this. Real Earth breakfast." She sniffed the eggs cautiously. They smelled strange, but not bad. With small bites, she tasted it. It was warm, soft, comforting. Mark watched her eat. "I found some tools yesterday," he said. "Might be able to fix your pod. I don't know much about alien tech, but I'll try." Ziri looked up, eyes wide. "Fix? Pod?" She quickly reached for the side of her jacket and pulled out a small device. It was cracked and blinking red. A signal, still active. Her heart stopped. She had forgotten to disable the beacon. Mark saw her expression change. "What is it?" Ziri's fingers danced on the device, but it was too late. The signal had already gone out. Someone out there knew she was on Earth, and they would come looking. Her people were not known for being gentle. Mark stepped closer. "Is that your ship calling you back?" She nodded slowly. "Are they friendly?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No." Mark took a deep breath. "Then we need to get moving." They went to the crash site that morning. The small silver pod was still half buried in the dirt, surrounded by broken branches and scorched leaves. Mark had already cleared the area the night before. Now, with a toolbox in hand, he knelt beside it and opened the control panel. Ziri sat beside him, watching closely. She pointed at wires, shook her head at wrong tools, and began guiding him with hand signs and beeps. Though they didn't speak the same language, they worked together, human and alien, side by side. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. Then suddenly Ziri's eyes widened. She felt something. Not in sound, not in sight, but in her skin. A vibration, a pulse from above. She turned her head slowly and saw it. A shadow moved across the sky, too fast for a cloud, too smooth for a bird. It was a ship, not human, not peaceful. Mark stood, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Is that them?" Ziri grabbed his hand. Her tiny fingers shook as she looked up, terrified. "Run," she whispered. He didn't need translation. They ran through the trees, deeper into the forest, away from the pod. Behind them, a sharp whistle filled the air. A column of fire burst from the sky as the alien craft touched down near. The pod. Ziri's people had arrived. Mark and Ziri hid behind a rock ridge. Through the trees, they saw black armored figures marching out of the ship, tall, armed, silent. One of them scanned the pod remains. Another pointed toward the direction of footprints. They were tracking her. Mark crouched low, whispering, "We need to get far away." "But where?" Ziri looked up at him, then reached into her pouch and pulled out a small glowing stone. It projected a faint map, her escape route if she had ever needed to run. She pointed to a mountain cave far away. Mark nodded. "Let's go." As they started moving again, Ziri stopped for just a second. She looked back at the ship, her people, the ones she once thought would save her. But now, all she saw were hunters. The only one protecting her was a human. And they had just become targets, the human's kindness. The mountain trail was rough and steep, filled with fallen trees and sharp rocks. The cold air grew stronger with every step. Mark pushed forward, carrying Ziri on his back. Her arms were wrapped around his neck, her tiny body shivering under the blanket he had given her. Her breathing was shallow. She was getting weaker. They had walked for miles through the forest, escaping the black armored soldiers who landed from the sky. Mark had seen war before. He had been a soldier once, but this felt different. This time he wasn't protecting his country. He was protecting a girl from another world, and he didn't even know why. As they reached a small cave hidden under the cliffside, Mark placed Ziri down gently on a pile of dry leaves. She didn't speak. Her skin, once glowing faintly, was dull. Her eyes fluttered. The air was too thin for her lungs. Earth was slowly killing her. Mark knelt beside her. "Stay with me, Ziri. Don't close your eyes." She coughed. A bit of glowing blood touched her lips. She was burning up. Mark ripped open his backpack, grabbing whatever supplies he had: water, medical tape, herbs he had used on forest animals. Nothing looked good enough. Nothing looked like it could help her. But he refused to give up. He lit a fire near the mouth of the cave, then wrapping her in all the blankets he had, he held her close and whispered, "You're gonna be all right, I swear." She didn't understand the words, but the sound of his voice calmed her. His hands were warm, his arms strong. No one on her home planet had ever held her like that. No one had stayed by her side when she was weak. Her own people trained her to survive. But they never taught her to trust. Mark dipped a cloth into warm water and pressed it gently against her forehead. He spoke to her softly, telling stories she didn't understand, about mountains, animals, even his childhood. He just kept talking, afraid that if he stopped, she would fade. Hours passed. The storm outside the cave grew stronger, howling like a beast in the dark. But inside, there was light. There was warmth. And there was a human who wouldn't leave her side. At one point, Ziri woke up. Her hand weakly grabbed Mark's sleeve. She stared at him, confused. Her voice came out broken, in her own tongue. "Why not leave me?" Mark didn't know the words, but the look in her eyes said everything. He placed a hand on her tiny shoulder. "Because you're not alone. Not anymore." She blinked. No human she had read about in training acted like this. No warrior from her species had ever shown this kind of heart. For the first time, Ziri didn't feel like prey. She felt protected. She fell asleep again, her head resting on his arm. Outside, movement stirred. The black-armored soldiers had reached the base of the mountain. Their scanners traced footsteps in the mud. Their leader raised his hand and pointed toward the ridge. They were close. Back inside the cave, Mark sat awake, staring into the flames, thinking. He had risked his life for a girl he barely knew. But something inside him told him it was right. She wasn't just some alien. She was a child in danger, a life worth saving. He didn't care if they came. He would fight if he had to. Suddenly, a noise from the entrance. Mark stood up fast, grabbed a heavy branch like a club, and moved between the cave's entrance and Ziri. But it wasn't the soldiers. It was a wild animal, small, frightened by the fire. It ran off quickly. Mark sighed and lowered the branch. Then he looked back at Ziri. She was sitting up. Her eyes were brighter. She smiled. It was weak, tiny, but real. Mark chuckled. "Tough little thing, aren't you?" She nodded slowly, and whispered his name for the first time. "Mark." The sound of her voice saying it made the moment feel powerful. Two beings from two different worlds, now connected not by words, but by trust. But time was short. They didn't know the soldiers were already climbing the mountain, and the next time something moved outside the cave, it would not be an animal. The strike team arrives. The mountain air turned heavy. Cold wind carried a strange hum, low, mechanical, and unnatural. Mark heard it first. He stepped outside the cave and scanned the skies. The clouds were swirling above the trees like something massive was hidden behind them. Then he saw the light, A faint red glow shimmered behind the hills. Mark's heart sank. "They found us," he whispered. Inside the cave, Ziri sat quietly. Her skin had begun to regain its soft blue glow, and the warmth of the fire had given her strength. But when she heard that sound, the familiar hum of alien engines, her body froze. She knew that rhythm. She had grown up under it. Her people were here, but they weren't here to rescue her. They were here to erase witnesses. Mark came back into the cave, calm but serious. "Ziri, we need to leave. Now." She didn't move. Instead, she looked at the entrance of the cave and spoke a word in her own language, one that meant, "They're close." Mark didn't need translation. Outside, the red glow grew brighter. From above, a sleek black dropship hovered down like a giant insect. 6 soldiers, all clad in dark armor and carrying strange glowing weapons, stepped out. Their eyes scanned everything: rocks, trees, heat trails, footprints. One of them raised a hand and spoke in a sharp, hissing voice. The others nodded. They were moving toward the cave. Ziri turned to Mark. She touched his hand. Her voice was trembling. "You run." Mark shook his head. "Not without you?" She looked confused. "They kill humans. You help me. Why?" Mark crouched beside her. "Because that's what people are supposed to do. Help." She stared at him, her hands trembling. Then slowly she nodded, but it was already too late. A sharp buzzing sound filled the air as one of the alien soldiers fired a flare above the cave. The entire entrance lit up in red. Mark spun around, blocking Ziri behind him. He picked up the sharp branch he had shaped like a spear. It wouldn't do much against their armor, but he wasn't going to let them take her without a fight. The first alien stepped into the cave. Ziri screamed. The soldier raised his weapon and aimed at Mark. And then, everything happened at once. Ziri jumped between them. The weapon fired. Mark grabbed her and twisted sideways. The beam tore through his shoulder. He let out a cry but didn't fall. He shielded her with his body, gripping the cave wall to stay upright. Ziri's eyes widened in horror. Blood, human blood, soaked her hands. He had taken the hit. For her. "No," she whispered, tears forming. "No. No hurt. Him." The soldiers paused. They hadn't expected resistance. They hadn't expected the alien girl to protect a human. Ziri stood in front of Mark, trembling with fury. "He saved me, not you. He give warm, food, care." One of the soldiers stepped forward, speaking her language. "Ziri, you are young. You don't understand. The human must be erased." "No," she screamed, voice sharp like lightning. "I understand now. He is better than you." Mark, bleeding and dizzy, tried to stand beside her. "Ziri, get out. I'll hold them." But she grabbed his arm and held him up. "We stand. Together." There was silence. Then, surprisingly, one of the soldiers lowered his weapon. The others looked confused. "She defends the human," he said to their commander. Ziri looked at them with fire in her eyes. "You shoot him. You shoot me." The leader raised a hand, and then slowly lowered it. There was hesitation, conflict. They were trained to follow orders. But she was one of their own, one of the youngest scouts, and now she was standing with the very creature they were told to fear. Finally, the commander made a choice. He spoke in their tongue. "She has chosen Earth. Let her stay." The team turned away. The red lights faded. And the ship lifted into the sky once more, leaving behind a stunned human and a tiny alien girl still holding his hand. Ziri didn't move for a long time. She just stood there until Mark collapsed. Then her small voice broke the silence. "Help! Please help him." She stood up to her own kind. Ziri had never felt this kind of fear before. Not when her pod crashed, not even when the soldiers pointed their weapons at her. This was different. Mark was bleeding badly. His skin was pale and his breathing was shallow. He lay in the cold cave, gripping his shoulder where the energy blast had burned deep. The smell of blood filled the air. Human blood, and he was still, trying to smile. "Ziri, you okay?" he whispered. She shook her head. "No. You hurt. Because of me." Mark winced, but nodded. "Still worth it." Tears slid down her cheeks. She wasn't supposed to feel this way. On her planet, they were taught to never grow attached. Emotion was weakness. Sentiment got you killed. But right now, Ziri didn't care. Because this one human, this strange, kind, stubborn human, had changed everything. She looked toward the mountain's edge where the alien ship had vanished. But her people weren't gone. She could still sense them, cloaked and watching. They were testing her, waiting to see if she'd run back to them, waiting to see if she would beg them for safety. But Ziri didn't run. She stood up. Her small body swayed for a moment, but then she straightened her back, wiped her tears, and stepped out of the cave. The wind blew through her hair as she looked out over the ridge. Then she did something no one from her kind had done before. She spoke back to the sky. "I know you hear me," she shouted in her native tongue, voice strong. "You left him to die. He protected me. He fed me. He saved my life." There was no reply, but she knew they were listening. "You called humans animals," she said louder, "but this one gave me warmth. You trained me to survive, but he taught me to live." A humming sound echoed in the air, deep and steady. A small drone uncloaked above the trees, floating silently, recording everything. It sent her words straight back to the command ship in orbit. Ziri pointed to it. "I'm not coming back with you, not ever. I choose him." Inside the cave, Mark tried to lift his head. "What's going on?" Ziri ran back to him and knelt beside him. Her tiny hands glowed as she pulled out a small device from her jacket, a rare energy pod that healed minor wounds. It was only meant for emergency use, and she only had one. She broke it open and pressed it gently against his injury. A soft light pulsed as the burn on his shoulder began to close. The pain on his face faded just slightly. He blinked at her. "You didn't have to use that." "I did," she said quietly. "Because I chose you." Mark looked confused. "Chose me for what?" She smiled, barely able to hold her tears. "For family." Up above, inside the alien ship, Commander Talvek watched the recording in silence. His officers stood behind him, uncomfortable, unsure. "She rejected us," one whispered. "No," Talvek said, still watching the screen. "She chose something we've forgotten. Compassion." The screen showed the tiny alien girl holding the human's hand, her face full of determination. Her decision was clear. "She has made her choice," the commander said, "and we will honor it." Back on Earth, a faint boom echoed across the sky as the alien ship left orbit and vanished into the stars. Ziri felt it. She looked up and smiled. They were gone. She had stood against her own people, and they had listened. Mark sat up slowly, his strength returning bit by bit. He looked at the girl beside him, the one who had once flinched at his shadow, who had thought he would eat her, who now called him family. "Ziri." "What now?" She thought for a moment, then looked at the horizon. "Now, we go home." Mark smiled. "Which one?" Ziri leaned her head on his arm. "Yours." A new beginning spring arrived in the forest. Snow melted into gentle streams, and flowers pushed up from the ground, painting the earth with colors. Birds returned to the trees, and sunlight warmed the wooden roof of a small cabin nestled between two hills. Inside that cabin, laughter echoed. Ziri stood on a stool in the kitchen, carefully stirring soup in a pot while wearing one of Mark's oversized t-shirts tied around her waist. Her tiny hands moved with care. She had learned to cook, human style. Sort of. The last time she tried, the eggs turned purple. Mark sat at the table nearby, his shoulder healed but still sore, watching her with a quiet smile. He still found it hard to believe how much had changed. The girl who once thought he was going to eat her now lived with him like family. Ziri turned and held up the spoon. Taste test? Mark grinned. I'm still recovering from your last one. She stuck out her tongue. This time not poison, promise. He laughed and leaned forward to taste the soup. It was actually good. Spicy, warm, and a little sweet. Wow, that's edible. Ziri beamed with pride. Better than forest. Bugs. Much better. Their little home was full of odd things now. Alien tools hung beside fishing nets. A translator device sat next to a pile of old Earth comic books. And on the wall, framed carefully, was the first photo they had taken together. Ziri sitting on Mark's shoulder, both of them laughing under the stars. But peace didn't come easy. The world outside still didn't know about Ziri. They had agreed to keep her hidden, at least for now. News of her kind might start a panic, or worse, attract people who didn't care about kindness, only power. Ziri was okay with hiding. For now, because for the first time in her life, she felt free. One evening, they went up to the ridge together. The same place she had stood and shouted at the sky, the same place where she had chosen to stay. They sat in silence, watching the stars. Do you think they'll come back? Mark asked. Ziri didn't answer right away. She looked at the stars, remembering her people, the cold soldiers, the endless rules, the silence. Maybe, she said at last, but if they do, I will not hide. Mark nodded. You stood up to them once. That was brave. Ziri turned to him. I was only brave because you showed me how. That night, as they walked back down the hill, a soft breeze blew through the forest. Ziri suddenly stopped. She turned her head, and for a moment she swore she saw something, a flicker in the trees, a shimmer, like someone was watching. But when she blinked, it was gone. Mark noticed. Something wrong? She paused. No, just feeling watched. He nodded, placing a hand gently on her back. Then let them watch. You've got nothing to hide anymore. They walked back together side by side, not as human and alien, but as family. Weeks passed. Ziri began drawing pictures. Strange. Worlds. Glowing animals. Her old pod. And sometimes people who looked like Mark, with extra arms. Just in case, she joked. Mark began fixing up the cabin, adding solar panels, building a garden. He made a small room just for her, with soft pillows, alien lighting she liked, and a window that looked up at the stars. But the most important thing he added? A mailbox. Because one day, they would tell the world. And when they did, he wanted the world to write back with kindness. One morning, as Ziri sat on the porch eating berries, a hawk flew overhead. She looked up, her eyes glowing in the sunlight. Mark stepped out, holding 2 mugs. Hot chocolate? Ziri smiled. Only if you promise not to drink mine again. He laughed and handed her the mug. They sat in silence again, watching the wind move through the trees. After a long moment, Ziri leaned her head on his arm. I thought you would eat me, she whispered. Mark chuckled. I thought you'd bite off my hand. You did scream. Loudly. They both laughed. Then she added, quietly, I'm glad you didn't run away. Mark looked at her, heartful. So am I, Ziri. High above them, the stars twinkled. One of them blinked, then disappeared. Was it a ship? A satellite? Or maybe just the start of something new? Whatever it was, Ziri didn't feel scared anymore. Because whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone.